I caught my son filming me at my second job to mock me online. I made him work both jobs with me for a month. I caught my son filming me at my second job to mock me online. I made him work both jobs with me for a month. The video had already been up for 6 hours when my coworker Anthony showed me his phone during our break at the warehouse. There I was on the screen, pushing a pallet jack loaded with boxes, my back bent at an awkward angle, my work shirt soaked through with sweat. The caption read, "My dad's second job because he's too broke to support us properly," with 3 laughing emojis. My 15-year-old son Caleb had filmed me through the chain-link fence that separated the loading dock from the employee parking lot. He must have waited in my truck after school instead of going home like he was supposed to. The video had 18,000 views. The comments were worse than the caption. People I'd never met were calling me a deadbeat, a failure, asking why I had kids if I couldn't afford them. Someone had identified the warehouse logo on my shirt and tagged the company. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped Anthony's phone. He took it back gently and said, "Man, I'm sorry, kids don't understand." But this wasn't about understanding. This was cruelty. This was my son weaponizing my exhaustion for internet points while I worked 70 hours a week to keep him fed and housed. I finished my shift at the warehouse at midnight and drove home in my 15-year-old pickup truck that Caleb had called embarrassing last month when I picked him up from school. The house was dark, except for the blue glow coming from his bedroom window. He was still awake, probably scrolling through comments on his post, probably laughing with his friends about his loser dad. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, trying to decide how to handle this. My first instinct was to go in there and take his phone and ground him until he graduated. But anger wouldn't teach him anything. Punishment wouldn't make him understand what he'd done. I needed him to feel it, to live it, to know exactly what those 70 hours a week actually meant. I walked into the house and went straight to his room without knocking. Caleb was lying on his bed with his phone, exactly as I'd pictured. He looked up when I opened the door and had the decency to look guilty for about half a second before his expression shifted to defensive. "Dad, I can explain." I told him to save it. Told him to be ready to leave the house at 5 a.m. tomorrow. He was coming to work with me. Both jobs, every shift, for the next month. Caleb tried to argue, said he had school, had basketball practice, had plans with his friends. I told him he should have thought about that before he decided to publicly humiliate me for entertainment. School started at 7:45. My first job started at 6 a.m. He could do both. Basketball and friends would have to wait. He said I couldn't make him, that it was illegal or something, that I was being unfair. I asked him if posting that video had been fair, if mocking the man who worked 2 jobs to pay for his phone and his basketball shoes and his streaming services had been fair. He went quiet. Good. I told him to set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. and left his room before I said something I'd regret. My wife Donna was waiting in the kitchen when I came out. She'd seen the video too. One of her coworkers had sent it to her with a, "Is this your husband?" message. She asked what I was planning to do. I told her. She thought about it for a long moment, then nodded. She said maybe Caleb needed to learn this lesson the hard way. She said she'd pack lunches for both of us and make sure he actually got up in the morning. That night I barely slept, running through everything Caleb would experience over the next month. The exhaustion, the physical pain, the way time moved differently when you were doing hard labor for minimum wage. The alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., and I heard Donna in Caleb's room, turning on the light, pulling off his blankets, telling him to get up. He stumbled into the kitchen 20 minutes later in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his eyes barely open, his hair sticking up in every direction. I told him to change into jeans and work boots if he had them. He didn't have work boots. Of course he didn't. He had $200 basketball shoes, but no work boots. I told him the jeans would have to do, and to wear sneakers he didn't care about because they'd be ruined by the end of the month. We left the house at 5:15 a.m., the sky still dark, the streets empty, except for other people heading to early shifts. Caleb fell asleep in the passenger seat within 5 minutes. I let him sleep for the 20-minute drive to Mercy Heights Elementary School, where I worked as a custodian, my first job, the one I'd had for 12 years, the one that came with health insurance and a pension that wouldn't be worth much, but was better than nothing. I pulled into the employee lot at 5:40 a.m. and shook Caleb awake. He looked around confused, trying to figure out where we were. I handed him a mop and a bucket and told him to follow me. The elementary school was dark and quiet at 6 in the morning. Just me and 2 other custodians, Rita and Frank, who'd been there even longer than I had. They looked surprised when I came in with Caleb trailing behind me, but I'd already texted our supervisor Dennis the night before explaining the situation. Dennis had 3 teenagers of his own. He'd given me permission to bring Caleb as long as he actually worked and didn't touch anything he wasn't supposed to. Rita figured out what was happening immediately. She looked at Caleb with that expression teachers get when they know a kid has messed up and is about to learn a hard lesson. Frank just handed Caleb a pair of rubber gloves without comment. I showed Caleb how to mix the cleaning solution in the mop bucket, how to wring out the mop so it wasn't dripping, how to work in straight lines so you didn't miss spots. He watched with barely concealed disgust as I demonstrated. Then I pointed him toward the kindergarten hallway and told him to start mopping. He said, "You're serious about this?" I told him I'd never been more serious about anything in my life. He took the mop with both hands like it weighed 50 pounds and shuffled toward the hallway like he was walking to his execution. I worked the main hallway and the cafeteria while keeping an eye on Caleb's progress. He was slow and sloppy, leaving streaks and puddles, having to redo sections when the mop bucket tipped over because he hadn't secured it properly. By 7 a.m., he'd finished maybe a quarter of what I would have done in the same time. His arms were shaking. Good. After the floors came the bathrooms. I took him into the boys' bathroom in the third-grade wing and showed him how to clean toilets properly, how to scrub under the rim, how to clean the bases where urine pooled, how to sanitize the handles. Caleb's face went pale when he realized I expected him to actually stick his gloved hands in there and scrub. He said, "Dad, this is disgusting." I told him someone had to do it. Told him this was what I did every morning while he was still asleep, so the kids at this school could have clean bathrooms. He swallowed hard and started scrubbing. By 7:30 a.m., when the teachers started arriving, Caleb had cleaned 4 bathrooms and looked like he might throw up. I told him we had 30 minutes left, then we'd head to his school so he could make it to first period. Those 30 minutes were spent taking out trash from every classroom, hauling heavy bags to the dumpster out back. Caleb struggled with the weight, nearly dropping bags twice. The smell of cafeteria garbage in the morning heat made him gag. When we finally got to the truck at 8:05, he collapsed in the passenger seat without saying a word. I drove him to his high school and told him I'd pick him up at 2:30. He had to be ready to go immediately because my second shift started at 3 ASIC. He nodded mutely and dragged himself out of the truck. I watched him walk toward the building, his shoulders slumped, moving like an old man. It was only day 1. I picked Caleb up at 2:30 p.m. Exactly. He was waiting by the curb, still looking exhausted from the morning. He got in the truck and immediately tried to close his eyes. I told him to stay awake, told him we had a 5-hour shift at the warehouse ahead of us, and falling asleep on the job could get him hurt. He opened his eyes but stared out the window without speaking. We drove to Riverside Logistics, the warehouse where I worked loading and unloading trucks 4 nights a week and occasional weekend shifts when they needed extra help. The work was brutal, physical, repetitive. Heavy boxes, tight deadlines, supervisors who watched your every move and wrote you up if you didn't meet quota. I'd been doing it for 3 years, ever since Donna's hours got cut at the hospital, where she worked as a medical records clerk. The warehouse job brought in an extra $1,400 a month after taxes. That money paid our mortgage. Without it, we'd lose the house. Caleb had no idea. He thought money just appeared magically, that the things he wanted just materialized because he asked for them. Today, he was going to start understanding where it all came from. The warehouse was massive, the size of several football fields, with rows of metal shelving stretching up 30 feet toward a ceiling crisscrossed with industrial lights. It was loud, filled with the constant noise of forklifts beeping, conveyor belts running, people shouting to be heard over the machinery. The temperature inside was barely better than outside despite the massive fans running overhead. In summer, this place was hell. My supervisor, Jamal, took one look at Caleb and asked if this was the kid from the video. I nodded. Jamal shook his head and said, "Young man, you about to learn today." He assigned us to the unloading dock where we'd be taking boxes off delivery trucks and sorting them by destination code. The boxes ranged from 10 pounds to 75 pounds. You had to check every label, scan every barcode, stack everything properly, or the whole system backed up and everyone got in trouble. I showed Caleb how to lift with his legs, how to pivot without twisting his spine, how to read the codes and sort efficiently. He nodded along, but I could see he wasn't really listening. He thought this would be easy. He thought wrong. The first truck arrived and the supervisor told us we had 45 minutes to unload it completely. That was standard timing for a truck this size. I jumped in and started grabbing boxes, passing them down to Caleb, who was supposed to scan and sort them. Within 10 minutes, he was falling behind. The boxes piled up around him while he struggled with the scanner, dropped items, couldn't keep up with the pace I was setting. Other workers started backing up behind us. Jamal came over and told Caleb to move faster, told him this wasn't a game. This was people's livelihoods, and if we didn't meet our numbers, we all suffered. Caleb's face flushed red. He started moving faster but got sloppy, scanning wrong codes, stacking boxes in the wrong areas. I had to stop and fix his mistakes while keeping up my own pace. By the time we finished that first truck, Caleb was drenched in sweat and breathing hard. We had 15 minutes before the next truck. He sat down on a pallet and put his head between his knees. I told him to drink water and stay hydrated. He didn't respond. The second truck was worse than the first. Caleb's arms were already tired. His hands were blistering where he'd been gripping the boxes wrong, and his back was starting to hurt from all the bending and lifting. He asked if we could take a break. I told him we didn't get breaks until our scheduled 15-minute break at 5:30, which was still 2 hours away. He looked at me like I told him we were going to the moon. The next 3 trucks blurred together. Caleb moved slower and slower, making more mistakes, nearly getting hit by a forklift because he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings. Anthony, my regular work partner, pulled me aside during a truck changeover and asked if the kid was going to make it. I said he'd better. Said he needed to understand this life wasn't a joke he could post online for laughs. Anthony nodded and went back to work. When we finally got our 15-minute break at 5:30, Caleb collapsed onto a bench in the break room and didn't move. I sat next to him and ate half the sandwich Donna had packed. Caleb didn't touch his food, just sat there staring at his hands, which were red and raw despite the work gloves I'd given him. He said quietly, "Dad, I can't do this." I told him yes he could. Told him he'd been doing it for 3 hours, he could do 2 more. He said his whole body hurt. I said, "Welcome to my life." We finished the shift at 8:01 p.m. Caleb could barely walk to the truck. He climbed in and was asleep before I even started the engine. I drove home in silence, my own body aching in the familiar ways it always did after a warehouse shift. The difference was I'd been doing this for years. My body had adapted as much as it was going to. Caleb's body was in shock. Tomorrow would be worse when the soreness really set in. At home, Donna had dinner waiting, but Caleb went straight to his room without eating. I heard the shower running for a long time. When he finally came out, he went to bed without his phone, without saying goodnight, without protest. I sat at the kitchen table with Donna and told her about the day. She asked if I thought this was working. I said it was too early to tell. It had only been 1 day. We had 29 more to go. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said, "He needs to know what you do for him, what you've always done." I nodded. But knowing and understanding were different things. By the end of this month, Caleb would understand. Day 2 started the same way. The alarm at 4:30 a.m., Caleb struggling to get out of bed, his muscles so sore he could barely lift his arms to pull on a shirt. I heard him in the bathroom, the medicine cabinet opening, probably looking for ibuprofen. I'd warned Donna to hide it. He needed to feel this, needed to know that this soreness was what I lived with every single day. He limped into the kitchen, and I handed him a banana and a protein bar. He said he couldn't eat. I told him he had to eat, or he'd pass out at work. He forced down the banana, and we left. At the elementary school, Dennis was waiting for us. He told Caleb that today he'd be doing the heavy work, stripping and waxing floors in the gymnasium. It was the hardest physical job we did, required moving all the basketball equipment out of the gym, stripping the old wax off the floor with industrial stripper and buffing machines, applying new wax in thin, even coats, letting it dry, applying another coat. The whole process took 4 hours of constant movement, heavy lifting, and intense focus. Caleb looked at me like I might save him from this. I handed him a pair of safety goggles and told him to listen carefully to Dennis's instructions because the chemicals we used could burn his skin if he wasn't careful. The floor stripping work destroyed Caleb. The buffer machine was heavy and hard to control if you didn't know what you were doing. It pulled him across the floor twice before he figured out how to manage it. The chemical stripper had fumes that made his eyes water even with the ventilation fans running. His hands cramped from gripping the machine's handles. By the time we finished stripping and started applying the first coat of wax, Caleb was moving like a zombie, but I didn't let up. I showed him how to pour the wax, how to spread it evenly with the mop applicator, how to work in sections so you didn't trap yourself in a corner. He followed instructions mechanically, too tired to argue or complain. When we finished at 7:45, Caleb had missed first period at school. I drove him there late and walked him into the office to sign him in. The secretary gave us both a look, but didn't ask questions. I told Caleb I'd see him at 2:30 and left him standing in the hallway looking like a shell of the cocky kid who'd posted that video 2 days ago. At the warehouse that afternoon, Caleb's performance had somehow gotten worse. He was slower, weaker, making more mistakes. Jamal pulled me aside and said I needed to either teach the kid how to work or stop bringing him. Said we were dragging down the whole team's numbers and people were getting angry. I told Jamal to give me 1 more week. If Caleb hadn't improved by then, I'd figure something else out. Jamal agreed reluctantly. That night at dinner, Caleb finally spoke more than 2 words. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I get it. You can stop now." I looked at him across the table, this exhausted teenager who still thought apologizing was enough to erase what he'd done. I said, "You don't get it yet, but you will." Week 1 ended with Caleb moving through the work like a machine. He stopped complaining, stopped asking for breaks, stopped looking at me with resentment. He just worked. At the elementary school, he could strip and wax a classroom floor by himself now. At the warehouse, his scanning speed had improved, and he was making fewer mistakes. His body was adapting. The blisters on his hands had turned to calluses. The muscle soreness had faded to a dull ache he could work through. Other workers were starting to nod at him in acknowledgement. Anthony told me the kid was tougher than he looked, but the real change wasn't physical. It was in Caleb's eyes. The entitlement was gone. The assumption that life owed him something had vanished. He was starting to see the world differently, see me differently. On Friday night after our warehouse shift, Caleb asked if he could delete the video. I told him it was already out there. Screenshots existed. The damage was done. But yes, he should delete it and post an apology. He asked what he should say. I told him to figure it out himself. That night, Caleb posted a new video. In it, he was sitting in his room, still in his work clothes, looking exhausted and genuine. He said, "I posted a video making fun of my dad for working 2 jobs. I was wrong. I've spent the last week working both jobs with him, and I can barely survive it. My dad does this every week, has been doing it for years, to provide for our family, He's not a failure. He's a hero. I'm sorry, Dad. And I'm sorry to everyone I disrespected who works hard to take care of their families. You deserve respect, not mockery. The apology video didn't go as viral as the original post, but it got enough traction that people started commenting on the change. Some said it seemed forced, that I was making him do it. Others said it took guts to admit being wrong publicly. The original video started getting ratioed with people defending me, explaining that working 2 jobs wasn't something to mock, it was something to admire. Several people recognized the warehouse logo and left positive reviews for the company, saying they employed hardworking people. My supervisor, Jamal, showed me some of the comments and said, "Your kid might have just accidentally given us good PR." But I wasn't interested in PR. I was interested in whether this change in Caleb was real or just exhaustion talking. Week 2 would tell me. The second week brought new challenges. At the elementary school, the head principal, Mrs. Ochoa, approached me on Monday morning. She'd seen both videos, the original and the apology. She asked if Caleb was being punished or educated. I told her both. She thought about that, then said she'd been a principal for 23 years and had seen a lot of entitled kids grow into entitled adults because no one ever taught them the value of work. She said what I was doing was unconventional, but maybe necessary. Then she offered Caleb a job. If he wanted to keep working after the month was up, she'd hire him as a part-time custodial assistant for after-school and weekend shifts. Minimum wage, but real employment. I told her I'd let Caleb know. I told Caleb about Mrs. Ochoa's offer during our lunch break at the warehouse. We were sitting in my truck in the parking lot, eating sandwiches and drinking water in the heat. Caleb had been quiet most of the day, focused on work, not talking much. When I mentioned the job offer, he looked surprised. He said, "She wants to hire me?" I told him she saw something in him worth developing. Asked if he was interested. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Can I think about it?" I told him the offer would be there after the month was up. No pressure. But it was an opportunity a lot of kids his age would kill for. Real work experience, real money he'd earn himself. He nodded, slowly, and went back to his sandwich. That night, something changed in Caleb's attitude. He started asking me questions about the work, how long I'd been at the elementary school, how I got the warehouse job, whether I liked the work or just did it for the money. I told him the truth. The elementary school job I didn't mind. Kids were messy but honest. Their messes weren't malicious, just part of being young. The warehouse job I hated. It was hard on my body. The management was often unfair. The pay was barely worth the physical cost. But it paid the mortgage. It kept us housed. Sometimes you did things you hated because the people you loved needed you to. Caleb processed this information in silence, then asked, "Do you regret having kids? Like, would your life be easier if I didn't exist?" The question hit me hard. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and looked at him directly. I told him my life would be easier without kids the same way it would be easier without a house or a car or any responsibilities. But easier didn't mean better. He was the best thing I'd ever done. Him and his mother were the reason I got up every morning, the reason I pushed through the exhaustion and the pain. Working 2 jobs wasn't a burden I resented. It was a privilege, because it meant I could take care of my family. He needed to understand that. Caleb's eyes got wet. He looked away, staring out the window at the passing traffic. He said quietly, "I thought you were embarrassed of your jobs. That's why you never talked about them. That's why I thought it was funny to post the video. I thought you were ashamed." I told him I wasn't ashamed of honest work. I was proud of providing for my family. The only thing I'd been embarrassed about was not being able to give him and his mother more, not being able to afford the things other families seemed to have easily. But I'd never been ashamed of working. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and said, "I'm ashamed of what I did, of what I thought." I told him good. Shame meant he understood he'd done wrong. That was the first step toward being better. We sat there for another few minutes. Then I pulled back onto the road and drove us home. Week 3 brought an unexpected development. Caleb's basketball coach called me at work. Said Caleb had been missing practice for weeks, that if he didn't show up this week, he'd be off the team. I'd known this was coming. Basketball was important to Caleb, something he'd worked hard at since middle school, but he'd chosen to make that video. Choices had consequences. I told the coach the situation, explained what Caleb had done and what I was teaching him. The coach was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's harsh, Mr. Brennan, but I respect it. Tell Caleb if he wants back on the team when his punishment is done, I'll work with him to catch up, but he's got to understand this comes with a cost." I thanked him and hung up. That evening, I told Caleb about the conversation. He took it harder than I expected. Basketball was his identity at school. Without it, he was just another student. He asked if there was any way to do both, work and basketball. I told him I did both, work and fatherhood, for 15 years. It was possible, but he'd have to figure out the schedule himself, show me he could handle the responsibility. Caleb spent that night working out a schedule. He showed it to me the next morning over breakfast. If he worked the early shift at the elementary school with me from 6 to 8 a.m., went to school, then did homework during lunch, and in the evening, he could make basketball practice from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m., then come to the warehouse with me from 6 to 10 p.m. It would mean even longer days, less sleep, zero free time. I asked if he really wanted to do that. He said yes. He'd made a commitment to the team. He wanted to honor it. I told him he could try it for 1 week. If his grades dropped or his work quality suffered, he'd have to choose one or the other. He agreed. The schedule was brutal. Caleb was running on maybe 5 hours of sleep a night, going non-stop from 4:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m., with barely any breaks. By Thursday of that week, he was dead on his feet, making mistakes at both jobs, nearly falling asleep in the truck between locations. I told him this wasn't sustainable. He had to choose. He chose basketball. I told him that was fine, but it meant he'd continue working the elementary school mornings and weekend shifts at the warehouse to make up for missing the weeknight shifts. He'd still be working, just on a modified schedule that worked around his practice. He agreed without hesitation. Week 4 arrived faster than I expected. Caleb had been working with me for almost a month, had transformed from an entitled teenager to someone who understood the value of labor. But I wasn't sure if the lesson had really sunk in, or if this was just temporary change born from exhaustion and fear of punishment. The real test would come after the month ended. Would he go back to his old ways, or had something fundamental shifted in him? On Monday of the final week, Caleb came to me with a request. He wanted to use part of his first paycheck from Mrs. Ochoa to take me out to dinner. A real dinner, at a nice restaurant, to thank me. I told him he didn't need to do that. He said he wanted to, said he'd been calculating costs all month, looking at prices everywhere we went, thinking about how much things cost in terms of hours worked. A nice dinner was expensive. It would cost him maybe 10 hours of work. He wanted to spend those 10 hours on me. The gesture caught me off guard. I told him okay. We'd go Saturday night after his warehouse shift. Donna could come too. Make it a family thing. He looked genuinely happy about that in a way I hadn't seen in years. That Saturday, we went to a steakhouse Caleb had picked out. Nothing too fancy, but nicer than anywhere we usually ate. Caleb insisted on paying, pulling out cash he'd earned himself. Donna cried a little watching him count out the bills. Over dinner, Caleb talked about his plans. He wanted to keep working at the elementary school after school and weekends. Wanted to save money for college. Said he'd been researching state schools and financial aid. Asked me about my community college experience before I dropped out to work full-time. We talked about education and work and balance, about making choices that set you up for a better future instead of just chasing immediate gratification. It was the most adult conversation I'd ever had with my son. The month ended on a Wednesday. I told Caleb that morning that this was his last required day. After today, he could choose whether to keep working or not. No pressure either way. He'd learned his lesson. He'd paid his price for what he'd done. At the elementary school, Caleb worked alongside me with the efficiency of someone who'd done this job for years, not weeks. Dennis pulled me aside and said the kid was good. Said he'd be happy to have Caleb on the team long-term if that's what he wanted. At the warehouse that final evening, Jamal gave Caleb an evaluation form that all new workers filled out. He'd never officially been hired, just been working with me, but Jamal wanted his information on file in case he ever wanted a real position. After the shift ended, Anthony shook Caleb's hand and said, "You're tougher than I thought, kid. Your dad raised you right." Caleb looked at me when Anthony said that, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Pride. Not in himself, but in me. We drove home in comfortable silence. At the house, Donna had made Caleb's favorite dinner, her way of marking the end of the month. We ate together as a family, laughing about some of the mishaps from the past weeks. Caleb telling stories about learning to use the floor buffer and nearly destroying the gym floor. Normal family dinner conversation. After, Caleb went to his room and came back with his laptop. He showed me something he'd been working on. A spreadsheet. He'd calculated every expense in our household that he could think of. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, car payments, gas, his phone bill, his basketball fees, everything. Then he'd calculated how many hours of work at my wages each item represented. The mortgage alone was 103 hours of work per month. His phone bill was 6 hours. His basketball fees were 15 hours. He'd added it all up. To maintain our current lifestyle, I needed to work 173 hours per month. There were only 160 hours in a standard 40-hour work week month, which meant I had to work overtime every month just to break even. And that was without savings, without emergency funds, without anything extra. He showed me this spreadsheet with tears in his eyes and said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand that every time I asked for something, I was asking you to work more hours. I was asking you to hurt your body more. I was asking you to sacrifice more." I told him he understood now. That was what mattered. Caleb made a decision that night. He told me he was going to get his driver's license and buy his own car with money he saved from working. He was going to pay for his own phone bill, his own basketball fees, his own clothes and entertainment. He was going to take as much off my plate as he could while living at home so I could work less. Maybe even quit the warehouse job eventually. I told him that wasn't his responsibility. He said maybe not, but he wanted to help, wanted to contribute, wanted to be part of the solution instead of part of the financial burden. I looked at my son, this kid who'd spent the last month breaking his body alongside mine, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next week, Caleb started his regular schedule at the elementary school. 4 mornings a week before school, Saturday mornings. Minimum wage, about $240 a month after taxes. It wasn't much, but he was true to his word. He paid his own phone bill, started buying his own clothes, stopped asking me for money for things he wanted. The change was remarkable. His friends noticed. His grades actually improved because he was managing his time better. His basketball coach said he'd never seen Caleb more focused on the court. The hard work had given him discipline that bled into every area of his life. 3 months after the original video, Caleb posted one final update. He filmed himself at the elementary school in his custodian uniform, mopping a hallway. He explained that he'd been working this job since his punishment ended because he wanted to, because he'd learned something valuable about pride and work and what it meant to provide for people you loved. He thanked me publicly for teaching him the lesson he needed to learn. The video didn't go viral. It got maybe 2,000 views. But the comments were different. People sharing their own stories about learning work ethic from their parents. People talking about the value of humility and honest labor. One comment stuck with me. It said, "This is what good parenting looks like. Not easy, not comfortable, but necessary." A year after everything started, Caleb sat me down with Donna present. He'd been saving every penny he earned and had almost $3,000 in his account. He wanted to help with the mortgage, wanted to contribute to the household expenses now that he understood what they were. I told him absolutely not. His money was for college, for his future, for building the life he wanted. He said I'd been building his future for 15 years, let him help build ours for once. Donna and I talked about it in private. We agreed to let him contribute a small amount each month, $100. More symbolic than helpful, but it would let him feel like he was part of the team. It would let him maintain the work ethic and responsibility he'd developed. We told him our decision, and he accepted it with gratitude. 2 years later, Caleb graduated high school with honors and a partial scholarship to State University. He'd worked at the elementary school the entire time, saved religiously, applied for every scholarship he qualified for. At graduation, they asked students to acknowledge someone who'd helped them get there. Caleb called me up on stage. In front of hundreds of people, he thanked me for teaching him the value of work, for showing him that love sometimes looked like discipline, for making him understand that respect wasn't given freely, but earned through action. He said the month I made him work both jobs with me was the hardest and most important month of his life. It had shaped who he'd become. I stood on that stage with my son, this young man I'd raised, and felt every hour of those 2 jobs had been worth it. Every missed event, every exhausted night, every aching muscle, because he turned out right. He turned out good. And that was worth more than any amount of money or comfort or easy living. That night, after the graduation ceremony, Caleb showed me something on his phone. The original video of me at the warehouse was still out there in the internet's memory, but it had been recontextualized so many times by his follow-up content that when people found it now, the top comments were all defending me, calling me dedicated, calling me a real man who took care of his family. The mockery had been overwritten by respect. He said, "I can't take back what I did, but at least I changed what it means." I told him that was all any of us could do. Make mistakes, learn from them, and spend the rest of our lives being better than we were. 3 years after that month of working together, Caleb graduated college with a degree in social work. He decided during his time as a custodian that he wanted to help people who were struggling, who were working multiple jobs just to survive, who needed someone to advocate for them in systems that often ignored them. His first job out of college was at a nonprofit that helped working families navigate benefits and resources they qualified for but didn't know existed. He told me his first week that he thought about me and those 2 jobs every day, that he saw my face in every client he helped, that the month I made him work had given him a career mission. That made every blister and every exhausted night and every harsh word between us worth it. Because my son hadn't just learned to respect the work I did. He'd learned to respect all work, all workers, everyone who broke their bodies to take care of the people they loved. And that lesson would ripple out through every life he touched, every family he helped. The video had tried to shame me for working 2 jobs, but in the end, those 2 jobs taught my son how to be a man. And that was the only legacy that mattered. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.